Hello everyone, my name is Dylan Gross, and today I will be talking about Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, and I do apologize, my computer microphone is not great, but I still hope that you can understand me clearly. Alright, the article I will be discussing today is called Whitman's Leaves of Grass and the Writing of a New American Bible. This article is written by W.C. Harris and was originally published in the Walt Whitman Quarterly Review in January of 1999. Now, before getting into the article, I would like to give some context as to what religion in the 19th century looked like. To put it briefly, the culture surrounding religion was changing rapidly. The article states that 19th century was, to date, the most active period of sectarian splintering and Bible translation in American history. It was different translations of the Bible that were causing this splintering. This was the time period in which several sects of Christianity were first being developed. This article names Mormonism, Oneidan Perfectionism, and Seventh-day Adventist as examples. These examples are notable because, despite being ideologically Christian, these sects were practicing religion in a way that no one else had before. As it says in the article, the decades following the Second Great Awakening, which took place in the early 19th century, saw the decline of America's established or predominant religion and the rise and prominence and membership of previously minor sects. This leads into the argument of the article, which is that the 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass was written and intended to be read as a religious text. This New American Bible is based around Walt Whitman's own religious ideology. Now, before I can get into the specific arguments this article makes, I first have to define what a new Bible is in terms of the author of the paper. It's first important to note that America in this time was already facing an influx of newly translated Bibles, a topic I will touch on more detail later. Because of this, Harris considers any religious text that isn't specifically the King James Version of the Bible to be a new Bible, defining any new Bible as foundational texts that constitute a protocol of relation divergent from and meant to usurp the institutional status of that of extant secular and or religious documents. This leads into what exactly was Whitman's religious ideology. The first important tenet of his ideology is that religion should be independent from institutionalization or any form of hierarchy. As stated in the preface to the 1855 edition of Leaves of Grass, there will soon be no more priests. Their work is done. A superior breed shall take their place, a new order shall arise, and they shall be the priests of man, and every man be his own priest. While a good quote, Whitman's complicated ideas on theological authority span more than just those few lines. This article goes into detail about this, but in short, Whitman rejects the traditional power structure of Christianity while recognizing that religion can't exist without some form of hierarchy to distribute it. Distribution in this context is referring to the spread of religions and the way in which they gather followers, which in this time was by distributing physical Bibles, hence distribution. Now, to further complicate this, the article goes into Whitman's belief that theological authority cannot control the relationship between an individual and their faith or religious identity. Harris writes, the advancement made by the 1860 Leaves of Grass is a realization that the mediatory structures necessary to unification of disparities do not have to negate the value or scope of the new social identity being distributed. Whitman sees authority in religion as a purely practical sense. It's for bringing people together under this new belief system without actually telling them how to practice it or what to believe. The next point about Walt Whitman's religious ideology is the article makes is that religion should be able to change over time without splintering. To accurately talk about this, I have to give you some historical context about Bible translation. Bible translation began to take a role in American religion in 1816 when the American Bible Society was founded and they began distributing Bibles on a wide scale. This was happening while the King James Bible was being retranslated repeatedly. This led to more versions of the Bible existing at the same time when more and more people were owning Bibles, creating a trend which, as the author states, was increasingly towards sectarian and idiosyncratic revisions and retranslations, emphatically private versions of a Bible believers came to see as that much more their own Bible. Everyone in this time was reading a different version of the Bible, and each were coming to their own conclusions about what it meant. Another surprisingly complicated aspect of this is the debate over using immerse versus baptize. In 1826, Alexander Campbell, who was the founder of the Disciples of Christ, another Bible distribution group, translated the King James Bible. In his translation, he changed the word baptize to immerse to better match the meaning of the word in the original Latin text. This caused an uproar in the Bible community, and led to the further splintering of American Christianity. This controversy was influential to Walt Whitman as he was able to see how it intensified the problems facing any religious or social formation that are committed on one hand to unity under one God or state, and on the other hand to equality, the acceptance of multiple interpretations of that God or state. This contributed to his ideology. That's specifically the point that religion should be able to change over time without splintering, and that having different ideas or opinions about the religion itself should not cause different sects or deep division within followers. This leads directly into the following topic, which is the opposing ideas that Whitman saw in religion. These ideas are all direct opposites of each other. This includes using a translation versus the original text, inclusive practices versus exclusive practices, baptism versus immersion, and hierarchy versus equality. However, Harris brings up the point that each of these diametrically opposed ideas only exist because the other one does, and it is only within the whole of religion is when these conflicts can be reconciled. In other words, if we view religion as only containing one or the other of each tenet, and that one is inherently better than the other, then that religion already has the foundation to be torn apart. But if we view all these terms under the same context, that they are both equal and essential parts of the practice of religion, then these issues can be resolved. Now, these are a few lines from So Long, the poem that ends the 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass. These lines perfectly illustrate the point when you view them through the perspective of religion, not through the perspective of America. Whitman writes, "I announce that the identity of these states is a single identity only. I announce this union more compact, indissoluble. I announce the splendors and majesties to make all the previous politics of the earth insignificant." Adding to the list that Whitman believes religion should be a unifying force, not a divisive one. The next point the article makes about Whitman's religious ideology is that religion should be up to interpretation. To talk about this, I have to go briefly back to the issues of translation, specifically how it functions culturally. The article makes the very interesting point that translating a text essentially causes the original text to become irrelevant and inaccessible, therefore giving it a sort of death. This is supported by a few lines from So Long, which is primarily about death, with Whitman stating, "I announce a life that shall be copious, vehement, spiritual, bold. I announce an end that shall lightly and joyfully meet its translation." Here, he is equating his own death to a translation. Another important issue with translation is that it can never be perfect, but we almost always accept that it is without question. The author here puts it perfectly. The second language version is always an approximation of the original text, and yet, unless we learn that second language, we must accept the translations being more or less commensurable or equal to the original. This means that retranslated version of the text is going to be different than each other, therefore read and interpreted in a different way. Now this leads me back to the list and the tenet that religion should be up to interpretation. Like Whitman states in the 1855 edition of Leaves of Grass, "You shall no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead, nor feed on the spectres and books. You shall not look through my eyes either, nor take things from me. You shall listen to all sides and filter them through yourself." With all the tenets that make up Whitman's religious ideology, it begs the question, did Whitman write the New American Bible? Harrison's answer, or Harris's answer, because I mispronounced the name, is no, he did not. The conclusion that Harris draws is that the 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass is a religious text in the way that all the newly retranslated Bibles were, but it is not the new Bible. Harris remarks that Leaves of Grass is still a book of poetry. We can decipher some of it, but some parts remain obscure. We are left to parse it on our own. Leaves is part of the writing of the new Bible, not necessarily the final product itself. In the article's conclusion, Harris mentions how Whitman saw religion as an individual value that belongs to each person. No one, including Whitman himself, can tell any one person how to practice their religion or what to believe. This article is relevant to our class discussion because it provides a very interesting context to read Whitman's poetry. I always place Whitman in the context of the Civil War, which is still accurate, but by reading about the religious awakening and all the issues with Bible translations, it becomes easy to see how this might have influenced Whitman's poetry. He talks about religion a lot, which makes sense when we consider just how much religious conflict there was in America during this time. Another reason this is relevant is because religion and spirituality are recurring themes in Leaves of Grass and therefore recurring in our class discussion. He's constantly talking about how he views God and his relationship with religion, and this article supplements those important thematic elements. We often talk about his religion in class, and this article gives a different perspective to read his work through. In conclusion, the 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass was heavily influenced by American religious conflicts of the time period, and it can be interpreted as a religious text that follows the four tenets I discussed. This article gives the reader an insight into historical events that may have influenced Whitman's work and led to his emphasis on religion. Reading this article also allows for a more thorough understanding of the religious themes within Leaves of Grass. And that is all I have for you. Thank you for listening.